Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species, chronologically. I always like to throw in a chronological. A week from today, Rutgers plays their first football game. So gone with the wind is the summer, and now it's going to be autumn, which means it's August 22nd. And I could do about an hour Johnny Carson monologue with my guest, Hosein Kouros-Mehr, MD, PhD, the background and the things we're going to talk about. And you have the breakthrough, the book, your default mode. It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. People really need to listen to this because it's life, it's quality of life, and these are all new developments. And as we plunge into this, I've been a victim of a wandering mind. Most of my, at least the last 20, 30 years, really wandering. And it takes me in so many different ways. Sometimes I think it's kind of funny and cute and the things that I'm recalling, but it's not allowing me to do what needs to be done in the quality of life. And there's so much to talk about. So this, it's so fascinating, and I'm so appreciative that you're here, Hosein,
Absolutely.
because this is so important. So, monologue done. And why don't you do a little bit of an intro?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, Hosein Kouros-Mehr, author and a physician scientist, and this latest book, Breakthrough, Master Your Default Mode and Thrive, is about your brain's default mode network. So until now, we haven't had a name for this thing, this wandering mind. And I have the same thing, and millions and millions of people have the same thing. Essentially, during the course of the day, our brain goes back and forth between being present here in the moment and wandering off to the past or the future. We haven't really understood it until now. But now that we really understand it and it has a name, it now sheds light on so many mental conditions, things like anxiety and depression and addiction. And now we can understand how to heal this default mode network and have it work for you and not against you. And that's the whole point of this book. So I can go right into it. What is your default mode network?
What is it? What is it?
Okay. So first of all, what is a network? Let's start there. A network is something in the brain. It's different parts of the brain that connect to do a function. Our brain has at least 7 networks. And so one of them is the visual network, helps you see. And then you get to this network called a default mode network, which is essentially your wandering mind. So anytime your mind wanders away from the present moment, takes you to the past, takes you to the future, your brain actually switches over to that default mode network. Why does it wander? We can get into that. But I just want to mention that that's one of the 7 networks. Another one is called central executive network, and that is your brain that is present. It is the observing mind rather than the wandering mind. So when you're fully present, performing a task, watching a movie, and you're engaged in the present moment, that is the central executive that's on. And there's one other network, a very important one called salience network. That's the thing that shuttles you back and forth between your present mind and your wandering mind. And how does it decide that it's time to shift over to your wandering mind? We can get into that. So it's fascinating, and it's just the beginning. We're really understanding how the brain works.
Wow. So with this default mode network, it has its hand in conditions like ADHD and depression and loneliness and a lot of things. So, and by the way, we have in all the mental health stuff I've done, we got about the stuff I've read, about 80% of people who've had, have, or will have mental health conditions in America. So this, and we're talking about, the numbers may vary, but we're talking about a lot of people. So how does the default mode deal with these specific things?
Yes. So I guess helps to understand what is the purpose of the default mode network? Why do we have it? And so we are unique among animals in that so humans, basically, as we're going through life, we have events, we have memories, and our brain has to decide which of these memories do I keep? And it has to process information and help us decide, oh, it's time to make a decision. So the default mode network is doing that. Anytime your mind wanders away, what it's trying to do, it is trying, let's say, to go back to the past to process something that's happened or try to process something that's happened and decide which memories to keep and how we should change our behavior. And so in a healthy person, the default mode network will wander to the future, get you ready for an event that's coming up, or it'll go back to some argument you had yesterday, process it, and make you decide, all right, I need to avoid this person, or I need to avoid this thing. But what happens in people with depression and anxiety is this default mode network becomes overactive. The wandering mind turns into the monkey mind, and we keep revisiting old traumas, let's say, and it gives rise to depression. Or we're constantly revisiting the future, and it gives us anxiety. So the purpose of this book is to guide you to recognize your wandering mind and find out ways to silence it and to heal it. And so there are things in here, there's spiritual practice in here, religious practice. There is medical practice, clinical practice, cognitive behavioral therapy, different forms of therapy, and even medications, and just very simple exercises that you can practice, focus exercises, breathing exercises, all of which are designed to quiet that default mode network. So it turns out you can, at any age, train your mind to spend less time in that default mode, more time in the central executive. You can do that at any age. And what I would recommend is a holistic way of doing it, not relying on any one practice, but figuring out what works best for you.
Wow. I can't even process the amount of time it's fascinating how the brain will pick certain things. I mean, there are certain recurring things in my life that keep on popping up, and I wonder why. And it's this network that's conjuring this up, and because I spend so much time drifting. Well, we'll talk about it. In the book, you also talk about knots, Knots. Can you talk
Yes.
a little bit more?
Well, when I was in medical school 20 years ago, we didn't really understand the brain. The brain was very simplified, and it was all broken down in terms of chemical imbalance. But now we're just grasping the full complexity of the brain. And so what I didn't like in medical school is we called them syndromes, disorders, diseases. We gave somebody a label and said, this is who you are. And then we gave them medications that never cured the condition. So people were stuck believing that I have ADHD, it's who I am. And so recognizing that these are reversible, I call them knots, like knots in a rope, which can be firm and tense, but you can untie the knot, and that string, that rope, goes back to being its original shape. In other words, these are reversible conditions. And so I just thought knot is a little softer term than a syndrome or a disease, right? And so I call them knots. They're reversible. By understanding it with intention, you can untie the knot.
Wow. So there's 11 knots.
There's 11, and they're presented in a particular order. And each of these knots, that default mode network has its hand in it and worsens each of them. So it starts with stress, something that we all have. Stress is, it can give rise to all the other knots. And so the point of that chapter is for you to prevent stress from happening rather than dealing with it as soon as it's come up, finding ways to prevent that stress. So it sort of walks through what is stress, how can we prevent it? And then number 2 is emotional pain, another, core knot that many of us have, that many of us have not resolved. So getting at that root of emotional pain and healing it. And so there is spiritual practice in there, things like forgiveness, and other ways to silence that default mode network, which again goes back and revisits the past and brings up this emotional pain constantly for some people.
Wow. And the opposite of the default mode is the central executive. So
That's right.
theoretically, so what I again, in my limited understanding, you're in the central executive network. Colors are better and music sounds better. That's the
That's right. When you're fully present, and I call it the observing mind. So if you're fully engaged in a movie, or you're fully engaged in a mindfulness practice or a prayer, in each of those, it is your observing mind that is on, that is fully present. And yeah, when you're able to silence that mental chatter, you can be what's called in the flow state or in the zone when you're just fully present, and all of that doubt, negativity, all of that mental chatter is off. So there is a parallel here between athletes or singers who are in the zone and, let's say, Buddhist monks or other, spiritual people who are fully engaged in a prayer. There are some parallels there. These are folks, I believe, who are in that central executive. They've been able to shut off that wandering mind.
and therefore their level of achievement is extraordinary.
Yes.
Their level of I mean, all of these things. Um, Looking at myself, I've been known, and maybe this is symptomatic of my dwelling in default mode, but I've been known to listen to Simon and Garfunkel's Scarborough Affair
Oh, love that song.
uh, extensively. I mean, we're talking for hours at a time, often. And that's because I'm in this default mode network. I listen to it again, I mean, for hours. And actually, and I wrote about it in my novel. I put my character in that. Of course, I didn't know it was default mode, but I had my character listen to that for 3 days. I mean, maybe there's something really wrong with me. Just I just listened to it for 3 days. I tell Alexa, boom, just play it and listen to it for 3 days. So I'm stuck. I've been stuck in that default mode.
And in the past, I as well, really, and up until 2 years ago, I was firmly stuck in that. And I had all 11 of these knots. And part of this was sharing all of these learnings. And actually, the science, I felt, brought a whole dimension to this whole age-old process of self-discovery, because now that the science is here, there are a lot of folks who are maybe skeptical of, I don't know, spiritual practice. But it's important to keep in mind, we all need a healthy default mode network. Don't get angry when it shows up. There are times where it will definitely show up after a traumatic event or some horrible story in the news. It will appear. It will constantly go back to that over and over again because it's trying to process what happened. And so I have gratitude for this wandering mind when it shows up, rather than being angry when it shows up. I kind of observe it. And actually, by observing it, you kind of quiet it and silence it and ask, what is it trying to tell me? What is it trying to do here? And sometimes just observing is the best way to silence. Just observe it. And you'll notice if you really tune into it and observe it, it will naturally quiet down on its own. And so that observing mind you can strengthen with practice, with mindfulness practice and focus exercises, with breathing exercises, 5-10 minutes a day. You'll notice that observing mind growing in power, that default mode being tamed, and you sort of mastering that default mode. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Some years ago, some piece of energy, because I think I mentioned I'm rather spiritual, hauntingly so, and that's why I've written 2 novels to deal with that spirituality. And I recently did a reading with a clairvoyant. I wanted to, and and it was I don't know if we talked about it. She's amazing. She gave up an amazing career working for Oracle, and decided she wanted to go to school to learn how to be a clairvoyant and to be like an empath, and through connections. And she's a young woman, and of course I was a little bit skeptical I mean, I had never done anything like this before, but with all the spirit stuff in my life. But anyway, I mean, we did I interviewed her, and of course, she then did her thing with me. But she nailed things about me on the spiritual side that not even my wife could have known. I mean, deep stuff. I mean, so it was real. You know, she wasn't using glittering generalities. She was nailing, and she told me my soul was 1,200 years old. I've been around for a long time. But anyway, some years ago, I just bopped up. I woke up at 2, 3 in the morning, and I came down here, and I just sat and I stared at my computer screen, and this was 20 years ago. I mean, I don't know what to do, and I'm staring at it. All of a sudden, here's your default mode thing. All of a sudden, a song from the Bee Gees from the '60s pops into my head called Lamplight. And I may have heard it once or twice back then. It was not a popular song. Nobody even knows it. And I sat here, and this was in the days of Casa Light, when you were sharing. Music was not easily accessible, so you had to kind of steal it, and you had these file sharing. But anyway, I sat here for like 2 hours, and it took an hour to download one song. This is ancient times.
I remember those days.
But anyway, that whole thing,
Mhm.
Hosein, was transformative in my life, because from that moment I then found somebody who turned me on to some numbers in my life. It had
Mhm.
changed the whole direction of my life, and I proceeded to write my first novel from that whole
Yeah.
experience. But I was in that default mode.
Well, I think what is it? Do you think you maybe received an insight, maybe, the way that some folks, yeah, get insights, and then they suddenly appear out of nowhere. And so interestingly, in that, the third knot actually in this book is addiction. And one of the ways of overcoming addiction, obviously the first is to admit that you have an addiction, right? The process of sort of surrendering. But to come out of that addiction, you rely on insights, right? Insightful awareness, these insights that seem to come from a higher place. Where do they come from? So I think what's becoming clear is when you mentioned Simon and Garfunkel, the sound of silence. When you're in silence and you're in that central executive and you're present, you're more likely to get those insights to solve your problems. And a lot of times when we're stuck in that wandering mind, those insights are not coming to us. So I think that is one thing about being in that observing mind. When you're present, more insights come to you. And I've recognized it in these 2 years that I've been sort of more present, way more insights. And that's part of the reason I'm more productive now. I feel like these insights are coming more often. But where do they come from? I think part of the key is this central executive network.
Yeah.
There was a guy at the University of Cambridge, and so for thousands of years, scholars have been trying to decode what's called the Sanskrit code. It was like this, it made thousands of years ago about this ancient language of Sanskrit, and no one was able to decode it. And so this young graduate student tried for several months, and he just was close to giving up, decided to go back to India for the summer, and he just meditated and tended to himself, and went back to Cambridge a month later, looked at the code, and the answer was right there. I mean, it just hit him like a bolt of lightning.
Yeah.
And so where are these insights coming from? I think your brain is capable of solving the hardest problems. And part of it is waiting for those insights to come and creating the right mentality where these insights are more likely to come. A mind that is mindful, spiritual, present is more likely to get these insights, I think.
Perhaps we're like an antenna, in a way. I try to view myself as an antenna, because I've gotten it's never ending, the input that I get from all this. Wow. Boy, I'm sitting here. I think I could ask you stuff for 12 hours. It's so fascinating. It's fascinating because you said it before. There's so much about the human brain we don't and because it's so complicated, AI is going to have a real hard time, kind of duplicating it. It may never be able to duplicate it, which is good,
Yes.
so we keep a few jobs, I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. So there's another uh, in it's called the flow state.
Uh-huh.
And when you're in the flow state, for example, if I put myself into the flow state, and you have to talk about that, and if I'm down, and I really need like a little kick in my butt, I'll go find Ode to Joy and listen to that, and boom.
Mhm.
So without knowing the techniques, and of course now I have to, and I will plunge into this. Uh, um, but talk about
Yes.
the flow state.
Yeah. So what I would recommend is to give yourself, do some exercises, 5 to 10 minutes each, where you start the exercise, look with full honesty and acceptance inside your brain. Are you at ease? What are you feeling? Just look at it, whatever it is, positive, negative, happy, sad, whatever it is. Spend 5 minutes doing one of the hundreds of exercises in the book. Maybe listen to Ode to Joy. Maybe go for a walk, um, or a hike, or meditate, or do a prayer. Whatever it is, after the 5 or 10 minutes, look back inside and ask yourself, did any changes take place? The way a scientist would do an experiment. And try to identify those exercises that quiet that default mode network, that quiet that wandering mind. And you'll notice yourself a little lighter, um, a little more present, and a little more peaceful, right? And so identify those activities that work best for you and do them repeatedly. Once in the morning, 15 to 20 minutes, once in the early afternoon, 15 to 20 minutes. And you'll notice that observing mind building and building. For me, it took about 6 months till I reached that flow state where I could just be fully immersed in the present moment,
Wow.
really without any mental chatter, or the mental chatter comes. It's very normal for thoughts to come, but I can observe the thought come and observe the thought go while staying in that flow state. So for me, that flow state is a place of deep peace. I mean, just looking up at the sky is like blissful. Just feeling the breeze. I mean, um, nothing more than existing is blissful. So for me, that's the flow state. I was on a show with Rick, the founder of Jazz for Peace, Rick De La Rada, and he spontaneously did a 5 minute song on a piano, just there in the moment in that flow state. So for him, he's very auditory. His flow state is in music. We're all a little different, and that flow state is different for each of us. But just by silencing that wandering mind, you will enter that flow state. It may take some time, but the most important thing is to have the intention and remind yourself of that intention, because when you set an intention, you're using that central executive. Setting an intention is very powerful. And so every morning I have a little gratitude and I set an intention. May I, have focus today, concentration, whatever it is, setting that intention, very important.
A quick off-topic question, which I didn't forewarn you, but I liked it. I think it's a good time to ask this. You don't even have to answer it, but excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
First name that came up is Einstein. I don't know. That's just what um, yeah, he's very interesting. Oh, there you go. Very interesting guy. I mean, obviously spiritual, religious. A lot of the things he said, you see spiritual people saying. So his view of the world and would be fascinating to learn about.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had this picture. You said Einstein, and I sprung this question on you. I've had this picture of his eyes looking at me for the last 15 years.
Hmm.
And 15 years ago, I reached out to him, and just like I'm talking to you, I reached out and for some energy, I'm sure a lot of people don't reach out to him, but I'm always fascinated with his mind. I don't, and I can't comprehend, maybe you can shed light. I can't comprehend how a mind can conceive of the universe in 1900 and there was no Google around. That's my point.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does he conceive of these things without nothing to go by? What and he was kind of an all-around guy.
Mhm.
A couple of marriages and stuff, but I can't conceive of a human mind. So, but anyway, it's funny that
Yes.
you said that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. As I've read and in my own way, I understand that the sad thing is that most denizens of the planet will not avail themselves to this. And I find that
Yes.
to be particularly sad. Just
Yeah.
like, and I believe they're the same people who won't avail themselves of this, are the same people who deny climate change. My own impression.
Yes, that's right. Well, what is it that's blocking people from,
Yes.
well, and a lot of these people, their belief system revolves around me and I. And guess what encodes that me or I? It's the ego, which it turns out is the default mode network. The default mode network is your ego. If you notice, the types of thoughts that come up when your mind wanders tends to be about me and I. And so that default mode network is building the storyline of you as it goes back into the past, right? If you just notice when your mind wanders, the thoughts tend to be very selfish. Our mind doesn't wander and we think about climate change, right? Our mind wanders back into the past and say, well, why was that person such an asshole to me, right? It is the default mode network that prevents people from waking up and acknowledging that there is something far bigger out there than them. And so part of this book, the reason I wrote this book is for people out there who maybe tried reading Eckhart Tolle, they tried spiritual practice, they didn't get it, it didn't work for them. And I feel like for those people who are very data driven, maybe science driven, they will be much more likely to accept, let's say, a default mode network when you can show them an MRI scan. Like, here's an MRI, take a look at this person with severe depression. Here is their default mode network. It's overactive. Here is a Buddhist monk who's been meditating for 5, 10 years. Take a look at that default mode network. It's silent. Look at the data showing that mindfulness practice quiets that default mode network, improves anxiety, improves health. And so basically, I wrote this book for those skeptical people who've been denying that higher self and stuck in that belief system revolving around me.
Okay.
When you let go of me and I, you end up in a far happier place. I think that's what we've been trying to tell them. And maybe this is another way of sharing that
Wow.
story. Yeah.
Along that same vein, what about the statement that optimistic women might have less cancer and heart disease?
Yeah.
Does that
And so
work?
this is now the clinical studies are showing that positive mentality and qualities like compassion, forgiveness, patience, virtue are associated with healthy, longer life. And so, yeah, there was that study looking at 70,000 women over 8 years. None of them had cancer and heart disease at the start of the study. The study found that women who were more cynical, pessimistic, negative, more likely to develop cancer and heart disease after controlling for other variables. It's a correlative study, but there are hundreds of studies like that showing that, mental, physical health are connected, very deeply connected. And it makes a lot of sense when you understand what stress does to your body, on a physical, chemical basis. It makes sense physiologically.
So interesting. Uh, it's funny, in 1969, studying pharmacology, because I was a pharmacist, I said to myself, I don't think I want to age traditionally. I said that. So and so I have to do things and I have to be aware and I started doing some supplements, nothing, no mega doses or any of that stuff. But well, the point being, I've done and lived a certain kind of life. I'm no magical, I'm not a pioneer and but tomorrow I'm 79 and this
Congratulations.
thing up here works as good, if not better than ever before. There is no there's not a lot of magic. I got my knees. I can't play tennis anymore, so be it. But this important thing. So I've and I don't reflect on the whole age thing and because but it's part of what you just said, the being optimistic
Mhm.
and feeling
Yeah.
positive.
How about, how would you describe your social support, social network, family? Do you feel that was a critical part for your journey?
Yeah, we've been married 47 years. Uh, don't have a lot in common, still don't. But and of course my son, such a huge part, and my daughter-in-law, and my two it's a wonderful social network of
Yeah.
support and closeness. And uh, one of my heroes is Big Daddy from Cat in the Hot Tin Roof,
Mhm.
and he didn't want. He used to decry the evils of mendacity. So I took that, and that's part of my social network. Who's ever in my social network, if I detect a hint of mendacity, which is a state of being false,
Mhm.
then I remove that from my social network. I won't
Mhm.
get into
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
now, but I've removed. So I want to have my social network positive
Yeah.
and genuine and filled with gratitude and love and
Excellent.
as good as it can be in 2024.
Yeah. So I'm sure, heard of the Harvard study that looked at the best predictors of health and longevity. Are you familiar with that study?
No, no.
Okay, so yeah, there was an 80-year study, one of the longest studies ever performed, looking at a cohort of men in Boston growing up through, I mean, yeah, 80 years,
Wow.
tracking what are the best predictors of healthy living into old age. The number one predictor was not cholesterol level, it was not exercise, it was having a strong social network. That was the best predictor. And so maintaining that healthy social connection, healthy bonds, positive bonds, like you said, is critically important. So if you're tracking your cholesterol, you should also track your social connections.
Wow. I do
Yeah,
track. I do
yeah,
track. It's funny. My cholesterol is 96.
that
So,
helps too.
uh,
Right.
it was great. It was
Yeah.
great. And actually, my cardiologist is a good friend of mine, and he laughs at me because my LDL was like 38. He says, Calvin, you don't have enough. You don't have enough cholesterol in your body to even make plaque. But but you said something very profound. Uh, um, because that social network, my social network, 13 years ago, I made a very, very, very difficult decision to remove somebody very close from my social network. Somebody I'm really close. Just say goodbye, have a nice life, because I knew it was counterproductive to have that in my life. And the gods rewarded me for making a very hard decision. You don't remove somebody like that and a whole family as I did. But I felt without any guidance, without even knowing you back then, obviously, that was such a positive thing to have removed that negativity from, and I recognized it was so negative. And the
Mhm.
following day, my whole life completely changed. I got
Mhm.
involved became a journalist, NJ Discover, and it took me to a whole new plane of peace and contentment because I had that negativity in my social network, which is what
Yeah,
you just
yeah.
said. That's a wow for
Yeah, Well, one of the knots in the book, so after addictive craving, which is the third knot, is negativity. And that's one of the knots, which can do a lot of harm. And so overcoming that negativity, yeah, critical, whether it comes from somebody else or for a lot of folks, it comes from within, because our brain naturally will gravitate towards the negative. It's called negativity bias. And so overcoming that with this quality of equanimity, as it's called, in every single religion, the Stoics were all about it, but being at ease with unease and not gravitating towards the negative is important. So that knot of negativity, a lot of people suffer from it, not recognized as a medical problem, but can do you some harm. So
Wow.
very important to recognize and overcome it. Yeah.
Well, thanks to you, I won't be able to sleep tonight. Yeah, by the way, you notice I'm taking notes. I don't know how many times somebody is doing an interviewing takes notes, but I take notes. Is there a relationship between Alzheimer's and default mode?
Yes, yeah, there is. So people with Alzheimer's and dementia, their default mode network doesn't work. It's not functioning. And so they're not able to, they don't have a wandering mind. They're not able to process memories, process information, make decisions. So it does show that we all need a healthy default mode network, and it's perfectly normal to have a wandering mind. And so when my mind wanders, I have gratitude for it. I say, thank you, wandering mind, you're trying to help me. But when it becomes overactive, I recognize, okay, it's time to go back, do some mindfulness. It's time to do some prayer. Take it as a signal. But yeah, unfortunately, folks with Alzheimer's, their default mode is not working as it should.
Wow. Wow. I keep saying, wow. Do I love this stuff? I'm so glad the universe gods got us put together, because this is, to me, this is just so, it's so powerful, it's so real, it's so spot on. An opinion question to you, not necessarily off topic, but the advent of all this stuff going on with plant medicines,
Oh, yes.
ayahuasca, psilocybin,
Yes.
and they're trying to legalize all that stuff. What's your opinion?
Yeah, you mentioned 1969. Let's talk about plant medicines. Well, so what do plant medicines actually do? Believe it or not, it turns out they shut off the default mode network. That's actually how they work.
Wow.
And so actually Rick Doblin endorsed my book. Rick Doblin has been trying for 50 years now to legalize some of these medicines, recognizing the medical value. Unfortunately, FDA turned down one of those medicines a few weeks ago. But we're trying to understand the true medical value and how these plant medicines should be used legally and medically. We're not there yet, but it is pretty amazing that these plant medicines shut off that monkey mind. They shut off the default mode network and can give rise to a more expansive consciousness and what's been called cosmic consciousness. However, in some people, it does cause some major side effects. Some people do get psychosis, right? Brian Wilson said after LSD, he developed psychosis, schizophrenia. So, I think we're still trying to understand the medical value for certain patients like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, people who are victims of war or victims of rape, or they are high risk of suicide. So for them, there is some real value in these plant medicines that I think we need to understand and legalize for them. Or, people with major depression that is refractory to antidepressants, high risk of suicide. Those patients get what's called ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, shock therapy. That's what they get. I've seen it performed. I mean, it does work, but we're now understanding plant medicines could really help these people. So we still have a little ways to go. The studies are being run. It will be legalized. However, I wouldn't go around using these medicines without understanding them. They do have their side effects. So I wouldn't just go out and experiment. If you want to silence that wandering mind, the best way to do it is slowly, with intention, with mindfulness prayer, healthy ways of doing it. But if those methods don't work for you, get out there, try therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. If that doesn't work for you, think about plant medicines, knowing it is not yet legal, but there are clinical trials where you can participate. But I think a generation from now, those tools will be available.
Yeah, I think it's a generation away. It's not around the corner. All this stuff, because we just don't know. We just don't know. I used to joke about taking banana peels and drying them out on the top of my car and smoking them and to see what. And I got a little comedic about it, that I would, if I did that, I'd get a potassium high.
Right.
I made that joke up.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you did mention your next book is the Salience Network. Just
So this is the cutting edge. We're still understanding the Salience Network, but if you notice during the course of the day, you are either in the observing mind that is present, the central executive, or you're in that wandering mind, the default mode network that wanders away. You're either in one state or the other. You're not in both at the same time. So how does your brain decide, okay, it's time to switch over to the wandering mind, or it's time to be present? That's the Salience Network. So that's the gatekeeper that, let's say, after a really emotionally traumatic event, will shift you over into that default mode. You're constantly going back. You know, if you're in a car accident, God forbid, your brain will go back to that over and over again. The Salience Network has tipped you over. Or if you're driving down the highway and you see some cop car, lights behind you, you're suddenly focused and present, right? The Salience Network has shifted you over to the central executive. So how does the Salience Network decide what state we should be in? Can we train it? And so that I'm still understanding myself. I'm looking at the scientific literature, but that's the next project I'm working on. Yeah.
Okay. This is on Amazon. I'll have the link for everybody to see. Okay. And I'm not just saying it because I'm sitting here talking to you, but I need to plunge into that. Yeah.
Let me, the audiobook is available. I'll send you a copy, a free copy. And yeah, the website is yourdefaultmode.com, and you can start reading the book for free there if you'd like, but it is on Amazon, and I'd like to get it translated. At this point, it's only in English, but the audiobook is available.
Okay. Wow. All right. Just a few minutes. I wanted to pick your brain completely away from default mode. Maybe I'm going into the executive. I don't know. I'm teaching. To pick your brain on, you do cancer research and drug development and stuff. So I have a couple questions to ask, and there's some, my pharmacy background, so I'm a little bit higher up and trying to understand this stuff. AI. I marvel. I grew up in the days of polio and Salk and the vaccine. I know it took 25 years to come up with that. And then I look at COVID, and it took them a year to come up with that because they had AI. So how much is AI really gonna help with cancer drugs?
Yeah, funny enough, I wrote a book, my first book I wrote about 10 years ago about life in 2029. There was a prediction that we would have Google Health, where AI would diagnose diseases months before a human physician would recognize symptoms. I still think that's coming, maybe in 5 years, we'll see. But AI will definitely revolutionize medical care. And so people always say, well, that'll mean jobs. I don't think so. I think it will help physicians, give them better tools. And so, yeah, AI will definitely help with diagnosing disease, recommending, let's say, clinical trials that certain patients should try. It's all coming, and we haven't even really seen it yet. So it's
Yeah,
coming.
we haven't. About 8 or 10 years ago, my son and I, we went into the city, New York, to a lecture by Michio Kaku.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I love, he introduced him. But he had just written a book called Physics of the Future, and this is it's got to be a solid 8, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was one thing that really that resonated with me because I read it. It's like the movie Sleeper with Woody Allen. You know, it's a bunch of years in the future. Some guy is shaving, he's looking in the mirror and he's shaving, and the walls are implanted with uh, um, um, something that sees into the body. So while the
Mhm.
guy's shaving and the wallpaper picks up one cancer cell, and the alarm goes off, and he goes to the doctor, and then they put in this little bot that finds a cancer cell and kills it. Boom.
Mhm.
That's what Michio Kaku was writing about,
Mm.
in
Mhm.
addition to other things. But it fascinates me. Now, the other question, being a little bit of a cynic, uh, uh, I alluded to asking
Yes.
you this. Do we really want to cure cancer?
Yeah.
And have people living to be 150 years old when we can't feed the planet, we don't have enough water, and we've got
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah. Well, my answer to that is I'm here to reduce suffering, human suffering, and cancer is causing so much suffering. Um, and I think I'm not too concerned about folks living too long. I'm just here to reduce some of that suffering. I've seen cancer affect my family and others, and just it's not really fair. People who've not smoked a cigarette have died of cancer that I know. And so for me, it's all about that minimizing the suffering. And the Elon Musk of the world will figure out what we're going to do if we're overpopulating the planet. Climate change. My second book, Extinction 6, is about life in 2066, where climate change has accelerated. Ultimately, if we're going to solve that, I think we're going to have to figure out nuclear fusion. That's, I think, the way forward, or just solar power that's far better than what we have. But yeah, we need to address it, and but we will. And I think once there's a little pressure on us, I think we'll focus on that technology. But for cancer, I think we need to minimize the suffering. There's just too much suffering out there.
That's it. Oh, by the way, do you have a favorite movies, couple movies?
Favorite movies? Wow. I I have three young kids. I've been watching too
Okay,
many kids movies recently.
okay.
Um, but I really liked Oppenheimer. I thought that was a fantastic movie, and really, I think captured the 1940s really well. And Einstein was in that movie. I don't know if
Yes,
you
he
saw that.
was.
Yeah,
Yes, he was. I remember him talking. I remember that.
yeah,
That was I loved that movie too. The whole scary stuff. Scary stuff that we did that and put ourselves in a position that we're in today. So, saying this was great stuff, really great stuff. And you fired up my cells up here, and
excellent.
I can't thank you enough for your passion and for your knowledge and for your time. Of course, you can always come back. I'd love talking about this. And maybe, when the salience comes
Yeah,
out. But I thank you so much for being
my
here.
pleasure. Likewise, thank you, Calvin, for what you're doing as well. My pleasure,
Oh,
and
thank you,
thank you.
thank you.